In a small town where everyone knew each other, a young woman named Emily stood out for her devotion to animals. Her modest home was a sanctuary for her pets, a tabby cat named Cleo, who moved with quiet grace, and 2 hamsters, Cinnamon and Sugar, who scurried in their cage. Emily's life revolved around caring for animals. She was the person neighbors called when they needed someone to walk their dogs, feed their cats, or take in a stray until a home could be found. Her reputation was built on years of reliability. People trusted her without question. She took pride in this trust, knowing it defined her place in the community. Emily's days were filled with the routines of animal care. She walked dogs in the park, cleaned cages, and ensured every creature under her watch was fed and safe. Her home, though small, was always alive with the sounds of paws and soft purrs. Cleo followed her from room to room, while Cinnamon and Sugar spun their wheels in the corner. Emily found purpose in these tasks. Caring for animals was not just work, it was who she was. The town saw her as dependable, the one who never let an animal down. This trust was her foundation, and she guarded it carefully. Emily's Friday started like any other, but the weight of her responsibilities felt heavier than usual. She was caring for 8 dogs that day, alongside her own pets. The dogs belonged to neighbors who relied on her while they were at work or away. Her small house was crowded with wagging tails and eager barks. Each dog had its own needs: a terrier that needed extra playtime, a retriever that ate slowly, a nervous spaniel that flinched at loud noises. Emily knew them all by name and habit, and she had a system to keep everything under control. She fed them, checked their water bowls, and planned their afternoon walk, which was the highlight of their day. The morning passed in a blur of activity. Emily moved from one task to the next, ensuring no animal was overlooked. Cleo weaved between her legs, unbothered by the chaos, while Cinnamon and Sugar burrowed in their bedding, oblivious to the dog's energy. The house smelled of kibble and damp fur, and the noise of barking filled the air. Emily thrived in this environment, finding comfort in the predictable rhythm of her work. She checked the clock, noting it was nearly time for the dog's walk. Her plan was clear: take them out, let them run, and return them to their owners' homes by evening. Then her phone buzzed with a message that stopped her cold. It was from a boy she had liked for months, someone she had only spoken to in passing. He asked her to meet him that afternoon at a cafe in town. The invitation was unexpected, a spark of excitement in her otherwise routine day. Her heart raced at the thought of sitting across from him, talking, maybe laughing. But the timing was terrible. The dogs needed their walk, and she had promised their owners she would stick to the schedule. She stood in her crowded living room, phone in hand, torn between her duty to the animals and the pull of something new. Emily weighed her options. The dogs were fed, their water bowls full. The house was secure, with no way for them to get into trouble. She calculated she could be gone for an hour, maybe less, and return before anything went wrong. It was just 1 hour. She convinced herself it would be fine. She locked the front door, checked the windows, and left Cleo curled on the couch. The hamsters were safe in their cage. The dogs, though restless, were contained. She stepped outside, her mind already drifting to the cafe, unaware that her choice would unravel everything she had built. Emily hurried to the cafe, her heart light with the thrill of the moment, though a quiet unease tugged at her. She dismissed it, certain her animals were secure. Her home had always been a safe haven, built on years of careful routines. An hour away, she thought, would change nothing. But in her absence, the animals she left behind began to unravel, their instincts reacting to the void of her presence. The 8 dogs, confined in the cramped living room, grew restless without Emily's calming influence, or the freedom of their usual walk. Their energy, usually released in the park, had no outlet. They paced and barked, their collective noise filling the small space. A water bowl tipped over, soaking the carpet. A chew toy was shredded, its pieces scattered across the floor. The room, once orderly, became a mess of overturned objects and frantic movement. Cleo, the tabby cat, sensed the growing tension. She leaped from the couch to a windowsill, her body stiff with unease as the barking grew louder. In her attempt to escape the chaos, she pressed against the cracked window, barely wide enough for her to slip through. She pushed forward, scraping her face against the frame, injuring her eye, and vanished into the evening. The hamsters, Cinnamon and Sugar, huddled in their cage on a low table, overwhelmed by the relentless noise. Their fragile hearts raced, unable to cope with the stress, and they grew still, succumbing to shock. Outside, Emily sat at the cafe, her attention fixed on the boy across from her, unaware of the disaster unfolding. Back at the house, the dog's agitation reached a breaking point. One pawed at the back door, its latch weakened by years of use. The door gave way, swinging open, and 3 dogs bolted into the yard and out into the streets, lost in the growing dark. The remaining dogs continued their frenzy, knocking over a lamp and tearing into cushions, leaving the house in disarray. Emily's brief absence had sparked a chain of events that would shatter the trust she had worked so hard to build. Emily walked home from the cafe, her steps slower now, the excitement of the date fading as a knot of worry tightened in her chest. The hour had stretched longer than planned, and the sky was darkening. She quickened her pace, thinking of the dogs waiting for their walk, Cleo curled on the couch, and the hamsters in their cage. Her house was supposed to be a safe space, a place where animals were always cared for. She reassured herself that everything would be fine, just as she had left it. When she reached her street, the first sign of trouble was the open back gate, swinging in the evening breeze. Her heart sank. She ran to the house, fumbling with her keys, and pushed open the front door. The sight that greeted her was a nightmare. The living room was in shambles, cushions torn, a lamp toppled, water pooling on the carpet from an overturned bowl. The dogs, those still inside, were pacing and whining, their eyes wide with agitation. 3 were missing, their absence a glaring void in the crowded room. Emily's gaze darted to the hamster cage. Cinnamon and Sugar lay motionless, their tiny bodies curled in the bedding, no longer spinning their wheels or nibbling at their food. She knelt by the cage, her hands trembling, but there was no mistaking it, they were gone, overwhelmed by the chaos. Her eyes scanned the room for Cleo, but the cat was nowhere to be found. The windowsill caught her attention, a cracked pane smeared with blood. Her stomach churned as she realized Cleo must have fled, injured in her panic. She stepped outside, calling for the missing dogs, her voice breaking in the quiet street. No barks answered her. The 3 that had escaped were gone, lost somewhere in the town. Back inside, she sank to the floor, surrounded by the wreckage of her home. The trust she had built with the animals' owners, the reputation she had cherished, felt fragile now, slipping through her fingers. The weight of her mistake pressed down on her, heavy and unrelenting. She had left them alone, thinking it would be fine, but the consequences were undeniable. Her home, once a sanctuary, was now a place of loss, and Emily sat in its ruins, overwhelmed by guilt and sorrow. Emily sat frozen on the floor, the chaos of her home pressing in around her. The remaining dogs whimpered, sensing her distress, but she could barely move. Her phone began to buzz, one message after another, as the owners of the missing dogs started to hear whispers of trouble. A neighbor had seen 3 dogs running loose near the edge of town, and word spread quickly in the tight-knit community. Emily forced herself to stand, her hands shaking as she typed responses, promising to find the animals. But the damage was already done. The first owner arrived within the hour, a woman whose dog was still in the house. She stepped inside, saw the overturned furniture and scattered toys, and her face hardened. She took her dog without a word, the silence louder than any rebuke. Others followed, some retrieving their dogs, others demanding answers about the ones that had escaped. Emily had no explanations, only apologies that felt hollow even to her. The owner's trust, built over years of her careful work, crumbled with each visit. Some left with tight-lipped nods, others with sharp words that cut deep. By nightfall, her house was nearly empty, the absence of the animals as heavy as their presence had been. Emily spent hours searching the streets for the missing dogs, calling their names until her voice grew hoarse. She checked alleys, parks, and the edges of the woods, but found no trace of them. The town, once a place where she felt known and needed, now seemed to close in around her. People she passed avoided her eyes, their whispers trailing behind her. The girl who had been the town's trusted pet sitter was now the one who had failed. The weight of their judgment settled on her shoulders, mingling with her own guilt. She returned home exhausted, the empty hamster cage and blood-streaked windowsill waiting like silent accusations. Cleo was still gone, and the thought of her cat, injured and alone, tore at Emily's heart. The next morning, Emily woke to a house that felt wrong, too quiet, too still. The absence of Cleo's soft steps and the hamster's gentle rustling was a constant reminder of her mistake. She sat by the window, staring at the cracked pane where Cleo had escaped, replaying the moment she chose to leave. The date at the cafe, so fleeting and trivial now, had cost her everything. Her reputation, her purpose, the animals she loved, all were slipping away because of one careless decision. She tried to piece together a plan. She posted flyers for the missing dogs, her handwriting shaky but clear, with their names and descriptions. She called the local shelter, the vet, anyone who might have seen them. But the dogs remained lost, and the silence from the owners grew colder. The community's trust, once her pride, was gone. Neighbors who used to wave now looked away. The story of the incident spread, each retelling making it sound worse. Her house a place of neglect, her carelessness the cause of harm. Emily felt the weight of every word, each one a stone added to the burden she carried. Her thoughts kept returning to Cleo. The cat had been her constant companion, a quiet presence through every long day. The image of the blood on the windowsill haunted her, a sign of the pain Cleo had endured. Emily searched the yard, the streets, calling her name softly, hoping for a glimpse of tabby fur. The emptiness of her home mirrored the growing ache in her chest. She had failed not just the dogs and their owners, but her own animals, the ones who depended on her most. The guilt was relentless, a heavy fog that clouded every thought. Emily sat alone, surrounded by the wreckage of her old life, wondering if she could ever make things right. 3 days after the incident, Emily's life was a shadow of what it had been. The town's whispers had grown into a quiet consensus. She was no longer the trusted pet sitter, but the girl who had let everyone down. Her phone, once buzzing with requests for her services, stayed silent. The flyers she had posted for the missing dogs remained unanswered, their edges curling in the wind. Her home, once filled with the warmth of animals, felt hollow, the silence broken only by her own footsteps. The hamster cage sat empty, a painful reminder of Cinnamon and Sugar's loss. Cleo's absence was the heaviest wound, each passing hour deepening Emily's fear that her cat was gone forever. On the third morning, as Emily sat by the cracked window, something stirred in the yard. A faint movement caught her eye, a flash of tabby fur near the fence. Her heart leaped, and she rushed outside, moving slowly to avoid startling the figure. It was Cleo, limping, her fur matted and one eye swollen shut. Emily knelt, her hands trembling as she reached out. The cat hesitated, then stepped closer, letting out a weak meow. Emily scooped her up gently, tears streaming down her face as she felt the familiar weight in her arms. Cleo's warmth, though fragile, was a lifeline in the midst of her despair. She carried the cat inside, whispering apologies, her voice thick with relief and sorrow. At the vet, the diagnosis confirmed Emily's fears. Cleo's eye was badly injured from her escape through the window, and she would likely never see from it again. The vet cleaned the wound and prescribed medicine, but the cat's shaken demeanor lingered. Emily brought her home, setting up a quiet corner with a soft blanket. Cleo curled up, exhausted but alive. For the first time in days, Emily felt a flicker of hope, though it was tempered by the reality of Cleo's pain and the dogs still missing. She sat by her cat, stroking her gently, vowing to never again betray the trust of an animal. The road ahead was uncertain, but Cleo's return was a small step toward healing, a chance to begin making amends. The days that followed were a blur of guilt and effort. Emily cared for Cleo tirelessly, administering medicine and ensuring her comfort, but the cat's injury was a constant reminder of her mistake. The missing dogs weighed heavily on her mind. She continued her search, walking the streets at dawn and dusk, checking shelters and posting online, but no leads emerged. The owners had stopped contacting her, their silence a clear sign that they had moved on. The community's trust, once her foundation, was gone, replaced by a reputation she couldn't escape. People she had known for years now passed her without a word, their judgment etched in their faces. Emily's home, once a hub of activity, was now a place of solitude. She avoided the living room, where the wreckage of that day still lingered in the torn cushions and stained carpet. The empty hamster cage was too painful to touch, so she covered it with a cloth, unable to throw it away. Her days were spent tending to Cleo and reflecting on the choices that had led to this moment. The boy from the cafe sent a message, asking to meet again, but Emily didn't respond. That fleeting moment of excitement had cost her too much, and she couldn't bear to think of it. She began to question whether she could ever return to the life she had known. The joy of caring for animals, once her purpose, now felt out of reach. The town saw her as unreliable, and she saw herself the same way. Yet Cleo's presence, fragile as it was, kept her grounded. The cat's quiet trust, despite her injury, stirred something in Emily, a need to prove she could be better. She started visiting the local animal shelter, not as a paid sitter, but as a volunteer. She cleaned cages, fed strays, and sat with animals no one else wanted. The work was quiet, unnoticed, but it gave her a purpose, however small. In the shelter's dim halls, surrounded by animals who knew nothing of her past, Emily began to find a way to carry her guilt without letting it define her. Emily's life settled into a quieter rhythm, one shaped by loss but also by a slow, tentative rebuilding. The town no longer called her the trusted pet sitter. Her name faded from their conversations, replaced by the story of her mistake. The missing dogs were never found, their absence a wound that lingered in her heart. Cleo, though scarred, grew stronger, her single eye bright with a cautious trust that Emily clung to like a lifeline. The hamster cage remained covered, a silent memorial to Cinnamon and Sugar, too painful to remove. Her work at the animal shelter became her anchor. She spent hours there each day, caring for animals that carried their own scars, strays with matted fur, dogs that flinched at sudden movements, cats that hid in corners. These creatures, abandoned or forgotten, needed her in a way the town no longer did. She cleaned their kennels, offered gentle touches, and learned their quirks, finding solace in their quiet acceptance. The shelter staff noticed her dedication but said little, letting her work in the background. Emily preferred it that way. The spotlight of her old reputation had burned too brightly, and its loss had left her raw. Cleo's recovery was slow but steady. She no longer leaped to windowsills, but she followed Emily through the house, curling up beside her at night. The cat's presence was a reminder of what Emily had nearly lost and a promise to do better. She rebuilt her home, piece by piece, repairing the torn cushions and scrubbing the stained carpet. The cracked window was replaced, but the memory of that day remained, a lesson etched into her. She no longer took on paid pet-sitting jobs, unable to trust herself with others' animals. Instead, her focus was the shelter, where she could care without the weight of expectation. Years passed, and the town moved on. Emily's name was forgotten, her story reduced to a cautionary tale told in passing. But the animals at the shelter knew her. The frightened dog that learned to trust her hand, the cat that purred under her touch, these were her redemption. In their eyes, she saw forgiveness, a kind she could not give herself. Emily found purpose in their quiet need, a purpose stronger for having been broken and rebuilt. She had lost much, but in the shelter's dim light, surrounded by creatures who asked only for care, she discovered a way to move forward, carrying her guilt but no longer defined by it.